Homeland has concluded after 8 seasons, and I, Riley Chow of Gold Derby, am here with executive producer and lead director Lesli Linka Glatter, who has so far racked up 7 Emmy nominations and a DGA award for the show. Now, looking back at the last 8 years for you, working on the show, what are you most proud of?
Hi, Riley. I'm so glad to be here with you. So what am I most proud of? I'm very proud that we reinvented the show every season, that it never was static. We were always going to DC, meeting with the intelligence community, with investigative journalists, and asking the question, what keeps you up at night? What are your deepest fears? And that's where the season would come from. And, you know, you'd think by the time you're on the 8th season of a series, you've got it dialed in. You're going back to the set, you flip the lights on, not quite that blasé, but we never were able to do that. We were always moving to another country. We were restarting the series again, redesigning. And I think it kept it fresh and exciting and hopefully relevant.
I felt like we were waiting forever for this final season. We originally thought it'd be coming out a year ago, then it was pushed back to summer, then it was pushed back to fall. Finally, we saw it this spring. So I'm wondering, kind of broadly, your take on why it took so long, but also now that we've actually seen the final season, what changed in terms of the plot and story direction?
Good question. So what took so long? One thing that we knew was happening was that Claire Danes was pregnant with her second child. So that we knew the season was going to be pushed for sure. And then when it was clear what the content of the story was going to be, that we were going to look at what has America learned since 9/11, and that the story would come full circle with Claire Danes, with Carrie Matheson starting off being suspected of having turned when she was incarcerated in a Russian prison, like Brody very much in the first season, and that we knew we were going to be based in Afghanistan, America's longest war. So we had to shoot someplace that would look like the Middle East. We couldn't shoot in Afghanistan. So we scouted a number of different countries before we ended up in Morocco. And the process took longer than we had anticipated. And then, it sounds like I'm making a lot of excuses, but it's not really that. But when we finally got to Morocco, we were going to shoot our entire season in Morocco, except for the very end. And it turned out many of the things we were told we would be able to shoot in Morocco were impossible to shoot there. So we had to immediately do a pivot after we had shot all the Afghanistan footage and actually return to LA. We have never shot Homeland in LA, but we had to build a huge forward operating base and shoot all of the military footage in Los Angeles. So that means we owed parts of 10 episodes. Usually you complete an episode, you go on to the next episode. That was not the case. So we could not start airing because that footage could not be shot.
You mentioned that, there's that intrigue at the start of the season where has Carrie been turned while she was in captivity?
Yes.
And I feel like that really was the hook for the final season, but it was left kind of open-ended in the later episodes. So I'm wondering what your take on that kind of dangling story thread is.
Well, I don't think Carrie's been turned, just on a personal level. But she was trying to find her friend Max. And, Carrie's like a heat-seeking missile. And America was doing nothing to get Max back and the black box. And her way of getting to Max was through Yevgeny Gromov, a GRU agent. And she's going to do whatever she has to do to get to the source, to get to the answer. And in fact, it's described in an episode I directed, episode 7, where they are out in the Fata together looking for Max, and they go to a town that Carrie had bombed in season 4, mistakenly, thinking that there was a high value target there, Haqqani, and he was not there, and she killed a wedding party. And of course was horrified by this, and that propelled her in a whole different direction in her life. So they end up in this town, in the graveyard of where she had bombed the wedding party. And she's furious with Yevgeny because he's obviously brought her there. And he says, wait a second. This is exactly what America does. You bomb, we go in, and we make friends. We rebuild the mosque. We build the schools. We win hearts and minds. And that's why she was with him, because she could get there and get information and find Max.
I remember watching the final season of Lost 10 years ago, and suddenly in every episode, somebody was looking in the mirror. I'm wondering if you had any visual motifs that you wanted to establish kind of early in the season that would kind of recur throughout the final season.
That's a good question. Again, thematically, the season was about looking at America and how they project themselves overseas. And if there was another horrible event, and in this case, we did not want to do something on American soil, like another 9/11, but we wanted an event that would make America stop and look. And would we behave differently? Would we stop and reconsider our actions? Would we take our time to find out what had really happened and not go to war with the wrong country? And what happens if you have a president who is both arrogant and ignorant at the same time? What would happen? So that's the context we were in. So everything comes out of storytelling for me, but there was a level of anxiety in every frame, hopefully. And we were constantly changing within the same scene, whether it's handheld on a dolly, and then within the same scene, handheld. There was a lot of shifting within the same scene. Normally we had done that scene by scene, and I think it added another level of tension that you couldn't quite put your finger on.
Now, going to the series finale specifically, you want to kind of honor the show that's been on for the past 8 seasons, but it's also your last chance to kind of upend expectations, and there's so much pressure on finales these days. So I'm wondering what you did that was like new for the show with the finale, and why you took those risks.
Well, you're absolutely right. Series finales are just, fraught with landmines, however you look at it. And I think we all felt the pressure of that, and that, we knew this was going to be the last season. We knew it going into it. We wanted to be able to end the series and the show in the way we wanted to. So I can tell you that the last 20 pages, of the series finale, we did not have literally till moments before I was shooting it. It was going through constant transition and transformation. And that speaks actually to Alex Ganza and Howard Gordon, who created the show. But with Alex, it just wasn't quite working. And, he has most definitely set up an amazing situation where it's not about being the smartest person in the room, but being in the room with the smartest people, and the best idea wins. And it just wasn't working yet. And we really literally went from Carrie was going to the Kirov Ballet, and we went through multiple transitions as to what that end would be. And I remember reading the last 20 pages and this draft that we actually shot and going, yes, that's it. I was so thrilled of that. We leave Carrie Mathison probably the happiest she's ever been. She is in this relationship with the GRU agent, but she's also a double agent. And I think for Carrie, that is a totally appropriate place to be. And she's back with Saul. She's back with her mentor. But earlier in the episode, you absolutely had to believe that she was going to kill him. that mission was more important than anything else. And that was a really tricky line to walk.
Earlier in the season, Carrie, I think she dresses up as a man and she's on a motorcycle, and that was actually taken from the woman who inspired the character,
Yes,
the real CIA officer who has recently retired.
yes.
I'm wondering what your relationship is with that woman, and how much collaboration you had maybe on this season.
Yeah, she is an extraordinary woman, and we were lucky to have her involved. She was on the set with us in Morocco very early on in the season, but she was a constant resource. You know, as I've said before, we have the most amazing group of advisors, and we use them all the time to vet scripts. Yes, we're telling a narrative story, of course, but anytime we're dealing with this realistically real world, we want to be sure that it's been vetted by the experts. So we have ex-heads of CIA and NSA and DNI. And of course, as a character, our Carrie Matheson source has been hugely important because she knows what it's like to be a female CIA agent and also chief of station, and what it's like in a Middle Eastern country. How do you go out? You know, you can't go out as a woman. So the only way to go out was to dress as a man and to ride a motorcycle. And of course, how could we not use that?
I went to a masterclass hosted by the Directors Guild of Canada, actually, I think last year with Paris Barclay. And I don't know if there are two television directors who are more revered as legends for the medium than you two. And during the event, he said that he can always see a Lesli Linka Glatter episode coming a mile away because of the care that he can tell is being taken with actors in her episodes. Now, given your experience and you know how your whole job is to analyze, you know, what works, what doesn't work, I'm hoping that you can kind of pitch yourself. You know, what distinguishes you and your work as a director, and also if you can speak to that care that you take with actors that he's latching on to.
Oh, wow. Well, what a beautiful thing for Paris to say, because of course I'm a huge admirer of his work. He is an extraordinary storyteller. For me, it all comes from story and character. You know, that is where how you shoot it, how you see it, it all comes down to story. I'm very motivated by point of view. Who is taking us through the story? How are we seeing the world? I love the juxtaposition between huge, wide, kind of global macro views and then faces. I want to juxtapose that political big view with a profound interpersonal story. And for me, the more complicated and layered and ambiguous, the better. You know, for me, like Homeland lives in that shade, in all of those shades of gray. And, you know, scenes where two different characters have completely opposing views and they're both right. That to me is very thrilling. So, you know, if I'm confused about anything, I always go back to story. I always go back to what the character wants and needs and what they're carrying into the scene, the basic things that you know, grab your heart and move you forward in a story.
I understand that you're constantly having young female directors shadow you on the set of Homeland. So can you talk about what that process entails?
You know, when I started directing, I came from being a modern dancer and a choreographer, which is a very female field. So it never occurred to me to think about being a woman. I mean, it was not a negative, let me put it that way. So when I started directing, I obviously looked around and saw there were not a lot of us. And when I got in a position where I was being hired, I felt like, you know, you got to open the door and grab the hand of the next generation. That's just what you do. So I started doing that a really long time ago. And one of the people who was a big inspiration for me was John Wells, the wonderful producer, director, writer. And when I was based at his company during the West Wing ER era, he had a program where he would he would find whether it was an indie director, commercials, documentary, and he would bring them in and have them shadow on 3 episodes. And then he would guarantee an episode to direct. And I thought, this is great. This is what you need to do. Also, I was very well mentored as a young director. So I just think it's important that you pay it forward.
You also have that Female Forward program with NBC. That one, I think there's a bit more information online, so maybe our viewers can Google that one. But I'm wondering, in your role as first vice president at the DGA, what are you doing behind the scenes to advocate for women, as we so often hear that you are?
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm doing it in various different ways, not just one way. Female Forward is one way, and that's been incredibly effective. And Jen Salke, who's now the head of Amazon, came to me when she was at NBC about partnering on a program, and that program has had a huge success. At the DGA, we have something called the DDI, the Directors Initiative, and that's had a huge success. So I think mentoring happens in so many different places. I would not limit it to one. I just did last week I was an advisor at the Sundance Directing Lab. I've done that multiple times, and I can tell you, you get back more than you give. It is an amazing experience to be working with these young, talented filmmakers.
And finally, you've got a show coming up for Amazon, hopefully called The Banker's Wife. So can you tell me what that one's about?
Sure. It's an 8-part miniseries, and I will be directing all 8 episodes, which is exhausting thinking about. And Meredith Steam, who is an amazing writer, who created Cold Case and the American version of The Bridge, as well as was a writer on Homeland for many seasons, is writing all 8 episodes. And it is about the banks that do business with dictators and money launderers and drug runners and the rich and entitled, kind of the Deutsche Banks of the world. It's got 2 great female characters at the core of it.
All right, Lesli, thanks for taking the time to chat. It's always great to hear from you. To our viewers, please check out our other videos with Emmy contenders like Costa Ronan, and also go to goldderby.com to make your own Emmy predictions.
Thank you so much, Riley. Always great to talk to you.